setting up, I'll just start the conversation. It's a pleasure to be here today. I want to thank Dr. Shah, Dr. Corrie, Sam Myers, and for inviting me to be here. And we've been through many things with Dr. Corrie in different parts of the world, reflecting on this topic. And I'm also very pleased with to be receive an invitation from Giri. And I think what's happening here is very unique when I see young people interacting with more experienced researchers and being mentored by what you are doing, and how, from their perspective, from a cultural perspective, or from an experiential perspective, how that research might be improved. It's a good model for institutions to. So today, when I was invited to talk about join this conversation, I naturally try to connect two aspects of my life. The part when I came here in '82 to do a Ph.D. at the University of Notre Dame, I was looking at my Ph.D. work in economics, and I ended up looking at the impact of the economic development process on children, because I was wanting to show that there are consequences of our action, and you could trace what you might. What? Oh, you are. Oh, sorry. Oh, behind it.
Behind the chair.
You want to make me a rock star? Put it on dead. But that's good. Yeah. So let me. So I came to study the economic development process on children. That was my research, and I did it on Dalit and tribal children in India, because they are the most vulnerable group in India if you look at the conditions of their living. And so how does the economic process impact them? So that was one part of the research. The insight that I came across that research is when you study mapping these processes of impacts, we had to look at economic conditions, we had to look at the physiological conditions, and Kevin, some of your research on, you're looking at health and nutrition, sanitation, the physiological, and then you look at the social environment. And that is not only where female literacy may be one indicator, but also you would look at the social, what Paulo Freire called conscientization. How do you politically mobilize people? And here's some methodological problems or issues that I raised in my research with standard econometric work, is that if politicization is important variable in explaining health outcomes, like in the case of Kerala, where my research was based, we have high poverty rates, but also high outcomes in terms of literacy and healthcare. And how do you explain that? Researchers explain that in terms of this political mobilization, where people then used public resources and access them well. Now, that is a significant variable. Then in an econometric work, it's captured in the error term if you don't explicitly do it. So your results are messed up, and you can't explain it well. And I posed it to one of the premier scholars in this field when I came to the University of Minnesota, and I said that affects the way resources are allocated. If you and I go to the World Bank, they're going to listen to you because you are Mr. Scholar, but you'll end up placing the clinic in the wrong place where it won't be used. So the first insight was policymakers need to focus on all three environments of the child. So in the Kerala case, it's no use for people being highly literate and highly conscientized if there are no resources. They're going to have high unemployment. There's going to lead to frustration, suicide, and massive underemployment. So you have to look at all three environments of the. And the case of Christians that you brought up is not only a lot of that demographic sample is Kerala Christians, the food may be a factor to that, but Christians showing up in other indicators is tied to then religion and schools and Catholic schools and Christian schools that brought the people up, like I'm a product of the Catholic schools in India. That's where my name comes from, Bruce Corrie. I meet many Indians and they want to know, did you change your name? Did you become American? No, I'm Indian as Indian. biggest part of my life was in going to Minnesota, having a professorship at Concordia University, and observing around me that people looked at minorities as deficits. I would read the paper and I would see the stories would be about welfare fraud, of criminal behavior, and I started to say that is all, and then looking at the data, we found that's not the case, that the communities are contributing such a tremendous amount that if you, today, I just presented it to the legislature, if you take the buying power of minorities in Minnesota is about $12 billion, which is bigger than the GDP of many countries. And if you look at the entrepreneurs, put them as a group, they'll be the 15th largest employer in Minnesota and about the top 15 in terms of the revenue too. So if you look at them as an asset, and if you look at all the human capital of the workers in the system, you'd have a portfolio of human capital of about $350 billion in terms of lifetime earnings. So what I tried to do in Minnesota was to change perceptions. If you change perceptions, can you change institutions? Can you change policies? Because if people naturally expect deficits, we are not going to have proper solutions. But if you change your perception and look at opportunities, would there be a case? So my experience over the past decade, apart from one governor calling me the smartest man in the state, is only he is one who listened, and in his speech, he would talk about it. He would say, I admire the entrepreneurial spirit of the Asian community. And when he went to Japan and China, he'd say, look at our community here and how can we connect to them? But we had the toughest time convincing his commissioners and the rank and file about the importance of changing the assets. And I just told a second panel just before coming here, I've been the only person ever appointed to a state task force to focus on the assets of the community, 2000, and it's now 2014. Nothing has been done since. But what I think has happened the most, which I think the biggest benefit was that the communities themselves have found that their assets have been appreciated and acknowledged in the academic sphere. And whenever I speak about this, I see the people perking up in the audience are the minority people, because for the first time they're hearing data and seeing data that have never seen before and portraying their conditions in a different way. So the next step now is to try to get that into the policy stream, and that's where I am. And so I'm trying to see, maybe by changing the approach, when I talk about the app, I did an app on immigration because I've been part of the immigration debate, and you can get an app that has all of this. You click, you'll find immigrants as consumers, immigrants as workers, immigrants as entrepreneurs, to help people make an easier case when they are portraying it. So one point is that always when we have academic debates, even in immigration, you tend to take the weakest case and hammer them. And so they've taken always the case of the undocumented worker, and by showing that they are harmful or cost the economy, they tend to criticize immigration as a whole. But even that analysis is flawed, as I showed the data. So moving from these experiences, what are some of the lessons I learned? And what I'm having here, I don't have econometric studies, I don't have that kind of data. I'm sharing you my reflection of being practical work in the last 15 years and this academic work earlier. What are some of the insights I have for what I call the architecture for change? So it looks like in order for change to occur, we find that some elements in various strategies, they have either some element missing or they focus on one element. I think Paulo Freire, again, the pedagogy of the oppressed, he made a fundamental insight that to have total change and systemic change, you also have to have an internal change, because very often you internalize the image of the oppressor. And if you don't get rid of that stuff, you become like that when you get the power. And so there's a process of getting the healthy self first. Not many people talk about it, but if you really want to have change, you have to be self-reliant, self-confident, and have that total change with it. Then when you start trying to mobilize community for change, again from the Indian case, like in yesterday's analysis, why are some Dalit groups better off than some other Dalit group? Take the case of Kerala. If you rank Dalits across the nation, they probably are the highest in terms of literacy and other indicators of health than other Dalit groups. And there's a reason for it. So part of that reason, if you try to analyze, it could be technology, it could be the critical mass of people in order to sustain a movement. It could be the resource base. But these factors come into play, as well as the practicality of conflicting egos, conflicting agendas, as people try to come together. And so you find great leaders, Gandhi, for instance, choose salt versus religion as a mobilization tool, a neutral element which can help to draw people out, and the passion that's very often used in India based on religion. Again, when you go through this system, I found as I have a friend, an African American friend, and he would say I could walk into any building and I'll give you the year of that building. And what he means is the year of the people's mentality in that building. So you go to this government office and he says 1955. That's the way people think. So, but very often we are not aware of these institutions we are part of and the mechanisms in which that institution influences the outcomes and what is correct and who gets advanced and who gets the access to the resources and how it is said. And so that institutional change is important, and the structures, and I mentioned about the different kinds of resources that are important, not only the economic one like Professor Charity talked about in terms of the wealth assets, but also access to information and other resources, and looking at what are the opportunities for even wealth creation and wealth building. What are very often we don't look at the issue as the opportunities that are presented or accessible, and how do you access those opportunities. And what is the role of encouraging? I would think, and one of the cases that we make about diversity is that diversity helps you think differently. And by helping you to think differently, you might come up with a different solution that other people cannot see it because they are still in the box. So in this process of change, how could you tap creative ideas from people and from this experience that could help make that change happen? And how you talk about it. As I mentioned, one of the speakers was mentioning yesterday about one of the student presenters about framing. I think that's a big thing about how we talk about issues and how we address it, because the message has to be communicated like that famous made to stick what they talk about. If I were to name some of the infrastructure that I think can play a role in the future, rule of law is so important. Some of our students at Concordia University right now in the legislature trying to change a little card every legislator gets for immunity. They're immune against arrest when during the session. So the students want to add except when you're DOI, right? And the legislators are fighting it because, but some of the deeper reasons we accept it, but it was a privilege. But because some of the legislators are getting worked up, I went before them in one of the committees and said, you know, I got to acknowledge you for what you're doing in a spirit of openness. Because a lot of immigrants come from countries where the rule of law is not acceptable. You go to the judicial system, they're only going to prosecute you. You go to the police, they're only going to hurt you more. And here, when you even are discussing the rule of law and the implications so openly, and even if you're angry, it says something about how you function. And one of the Supreme Court justices once said in a meeting was, the purpose of the law is to protect the individual from the violence of the mob. So there has to be someone that has to protect the individual. If we don't have it, then we are going to have a problem. And then you have protection of rights. I think to create, sometimes, and this is me, when we go through addressing some of these entrenched areas like construction, where it's tough to break contracts because of established relationships, it's a hard battle. What happens if you create a different blue ocean area where nobody's there, uncontested territory? So we tried some of those ideas, like in Minnesota, we're talking about cultural heritage tourism and this creating other kinds of models like Little Africa and Little Mekong, and where you are creating a whole set of industries and in business clusters that will bring jobs and bring employment. Everybody knows the role the internet has played in creating some blue ocean space for people. How can we use the technologies of today that can help change it, whether it is the internet and its ability to communicate cheap. I'm talking to a guy who wants to develop a software that will give at your fingertips the way money flows through the system. And it could be used both ways. When you geocode the data, it could be used by the citizen to see where money is going in a legislative session. It could be used by the policymakers to see whether they're serving their districts. But technology can empower and get the message out that might break, like we've seen in the big revolutions that have been happening in Egypt and how Twitter and stuff can mass mobilize and get out of the entrenched power interest where money dominates and where you have to have vast sums of money to win an election. Can you win an election without that? And I think coming close to a time where technology will allow the message to get out to be able to do that. Finally, talking about capacity building, and you know all about how to you're doing it here. I can see in Corrie, you're building the capacity of future researchers by helping them do research, analyze it, learn it, and that's the way that we build up the future. So those are some general thoughts that I had. I'm trying to merge these two areas of my life together, and thank you for
Hey, what's up now?
Brother, what's up? This is a groovy party, man.
Yeah,
I
brother,
can dig it.
solid. Right on.